was God. And some people would even say it's the bad people in us that appears to be Lucifer. Basically, the given name in the Bible is Satan, the chief adversary of God and the prince of evil spirits. He's traditionally understood as the angel who rebelled against God and was cast out of heaven. Lucifer's name was derived from the Latin word for light bearing, was originally used to refer to the morning star. In the Old Testament, the prophet Isaiah uses the name Lucifer to describe the king of Babylon. There goes another, for people who don't understand this, king of Babylon, Jesus, God, is he us as evil people? Well, Tim's going to explain all these little issues. And then if you're a Luciferian, you're the people who listen basically to Lucifer and believe in that system of badness, basically, Satanism, Lutheran. So I can't even pronounce these. Luciferianism. Yeah, Tim, explain to us what all this stuff is about, because on the other way of looking at it, we could all be God, couldn't we? We could all be Jesus. We could all be nice people. And so I guess the world is made up of good, bad, and ugly, and definitely evil.
Yeah. Well, I really like the scene in Macbeth where the porter at Dunsinane Castle, Macbeth's castle, he thinks he's in hell, and these people keep knocking, and he assumes that each person arriving at the castle is another new arrival, a recent arrival in hell. So he has these visitors, all of whom are of different occupations and different walks of life as he imagines, and they're all damned. And it's a kind of comic relief scene. I don't know.
A bit like this one on the screen.
Yes. Anyway, evil, its origin. What is exactly the case with this whole origin of evil? They talk about the fall of man in the garden, but we have been unfairly implicated in the fall, which apparently, according to recent research that has been done, is an unfair claim. We didn't fall, we were genetically engineered so that we fell. You could say dimensionally we fell. I mean, the whole concept of fall has never really been explained properly by our religious tradition. I mean, the Judeo Christian tradition of the Garden of Eden and the fact that Adam and Eve transgressed, they didn't obey the rule, the law, and they ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So we were told in Scripture in the book of Genesis. But that's not what took place. Let me explain. The date given by the mother, Sanda Davis, you can find her work at sandadavis.com. The date given by the mother for the takeover of evil was 12,000 years ago. This video dates the takeover of evil. The video that I'm referencing dates the takeover of evil to the younger, drier period of Earth's history. Charles Swindoll Chuck Swindoll has done a number of very educational videos on YouTube. This one I'm referring to is the Khazarian Mafia, the God Eaters. And it can be found quite easily. I'm also going to reference Lucifer and Luciferians, also by Chuck Swindoll. It's very, very educational. So anyway, to go back to this, the takeover of evil was dated to the younger, drier period of Earth's history. This is when the Elohim manipulated our DNA to reduce our chromosomes from 24 to 23. So think about it. The fall of man was initiated by a tampering with our DNA so that our chromosome count dropped from 24 to 23. This initiated a fall, a dimensional fall. Our vibrational frequency fell to a lower frequency, and we ended up in a lower density existence called the third dimension. So presumably, before the fall, we were in a higher dimension, perhaps 5, perhaps 7th dimension, and we fell. So this is when the Elohim manipulated our DNA, and they reduced our chromosome count from 24 to 23. They also founded the Babylonian, Egyptian, Chaldean settlements. They used their influence to create the money magic that has kept us all debt slaves for 12,000 years. So here is the evidence for the mother's date for the takeover of evil 12,000 years ago. And we can explain how they did it and how we can possibly set ourselves free. I think we could achieve a reversal were scientists to convene and to use CRISPR technology to unfuse chromosome 2 and 3 to help us regain our divine nature. Okay. The Younger Dryas was caused by a cataclysm resulting from a meteor strike. Europe and North America were covered with debris from the strike. And the video host, Chuck Swindoll, thinks it was an attack. I think the mother and other spiritually enlightened people will probably confirm that. The Elohim must have attacked us. Lucifer was their king, so they must be the fallen angels. They occupied one of the heavens. So it's interesting that the powers and principalities we struggle with are in high places. The mother has averted other such attacks more recently in our time, she believes. Okay, so what is DNA? Deoxyribonucleic acid, right? Now, what does that mean? Let's break it down. Deoxy is a Latin root word meaning God. Ribo in the Semitic languages is the same as rabbi. In Arabic, rab meaning master or lord. Deoxyribo, God, Lord, and Master is what that implies. Nucleic at the center. Acid, a chemical found at the center. So deoxyribonucleic acid. So acid, a chemical found at the center, right? So there you go. There you go. It is your essence infused into the human genome, the essence of God. So, and the Elohim tampered with our God genes to attenuate our divinity and divine nature. A fall of man occurred, yes, but not as the fault of any Adam, but as the fault of the Elohim who committed the original sin of tampering with Adam's divine nature by altering our human genome by fusing chromosome 2 and 3, thus reducing our chromosomal count from 24 to 23. Now think about that. You know, the DNA, your DNA, is vibrating at a frequency, a high frequency. When you tamper with the DNA, reducing the chromosome count from 24 to 23, you are lowering the frequency. Therefore, you are initiating the fall of man. You have a dimensional fall. The frequency drops, you drop dimensionally. So there's a lot of new age claims these days. You can see a lot of them online, YouTube videos, etc., that claim that this is the time of our ascension. They believe we will be able to rise in terms of our vibrational frequency. We will be able to rise again to a higher dimensional frequency. And so a lot of them speak about the fifth dimension, being able to rise from the third dimension in which we are now trapped into the fifth dimension. Very commonly claimed these days. All right. So the cult that hijacked the world, the Illuminati, our leaders are not chosen for their intelligence or achievement, but rather because they are able to win the people's trust and are willing to betray it. They are chosen by a small satanic cult of Kabbalistic bankers and Freemasons that controls the world's finances and media. One of the big problems, of course, is the control of the media. They control it. Thus, we are effectively misled by the media that is conveying to us a truth they would have us believe, not a definitive truth, not the bona fide truth, but just a version of the truth they would have us believe.
Tim,
Yeah.
sorry to cut you in the middle there. Can you expand a bit more about the media and the truth? Because a lot of problems we're finding over here
Mm-hmm.
and over America and Canada is that the media is basically doing the work for the government and the bad people like the Luciferians. So can you expand a bit more? Because some people obviously don't believe that your Daily Mail, your Daily Telegraph is gonna be doing that because you buy a copy of the paper and all that stuff. But really, they do. They kind of tell you what to say, what to think, and what to do, especially against the people who want free speech and the loving people of the world. They totally go against you.
Well, yeah. I mean, the media is misleading us on a variety of issues, and unfortunately, we're not getting the truth. And they claim they are conveying the truth, and they will say that people like us are maintaining or claiming falsehoods, and they will censor people like you and I, and they will justify themselves by creating emergencies or false flag emergencies like the COVID-19 pandemic. And they will create a narrative about this COVID virus, and they will claim that they have the solution. So they create the problem. They see us react. There is the reaction, and then they provide a solution. But the solution just generates another problem, and the dialectic continues. This Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution just becomes a self fulfilling feedback loop of control. And they create more problems every time they provide a so called solution. And it just goes on in a perpetual cycle. So they claim that the solution to the COVID-19 virus was a one plan solution, the vaccine. And nothing else would work against the virus, so they claimed. And look at the harm that has been caused by the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine. Spike proteins were found to be the problem with the virus. They were what allowed it to enter the human host. And so to fight against the virus, one had to fight against the spike protein on the outside of the virus. So they devised a vaccine that contained the spike protein on the outer shell of the virus, and they claimed that this would mobilize the immune system to defend against the virus, because it would help our immune system defend against the spike proteins on the outside of the virus. What happened, especially with the mRNA vaccine, is that the DNA was programmed in the cells to create these spike proteins on a 24/7 basis. And what would happen is the spike proteins would enter the blood, the circulatory system, and the spike proteins would embed themselves in the walls of the blood vessels. And this would initiate an autoimmune disease response, because the antibodies and T cells would go to the site of the spike proteins to attack the antigen, and that blood vessel wall would become inflamed from this immune response, and this would cause a blood clot. And some of the people who succumbed to the COVID, they claim, died of COVID-19, when in fact it was the autoimmune disease response initiated by the use of the vaccine that caused their death. The autopsy revealed that the blood clots in these victims was sometimes very long, like a foot long. And this horrified those performing the autopsies were just horrified by this. And okay, that's one problem, but the autoimmune disease response doesn't stop there. Many COVID-19 vaccine recipients, mRNA vaccines, particularly those provided by Pfizer and Moderna, ended up developing myocarditis, which means that the spike proteins embedded themselves in the healthy tissue of the heart, and then the antibodies and T cells descended upon the antigen, lodged in the heart of these patients, and the heart muscle was obviously under attack. The healthy tissue of the heart was being attacked by this immune response, and this led to myocarditis. And then some of the spike proteins would embed themselves in lung tissue, which would initiate a inflammation problem in the lungs or in other vital organs, including the brain. which would cause an aneurysm and possibly even a stroke in some people's cases. So, this is the effect of the autoimmune disease response to the COVID-19 vaccines. So, I wouldn't say that this vaccine was a very effective solution. And yet, this was what was promoted as the only solution by the mainstream media. And anyone who contradicted this mainstream narrative was censored, or they were so drowned out by the false narrative that was the dominant one that was playing on the news all the time around the world, that most people were effectively brainwashed by the mainstream media into believing the mainstream narrative and rejecting any other. And that was the plan that they had in their germ game, which they held at Johns Hopkins University just before the pandemic outbreak in March of 2020. So in October of 2019, they held this germ game, which was sponsored by the Gates Foundation and the World Health Organization. So you can see the planners of the pandemic were in charge of the germ game event. And at the germ game, which is like a war game exercise to rehearse your response to a false flag emergency that you yourself have created, they discussed how the media would handle the information. They would control the mainstream media narrative of what this pandemic was all about and what the solution to the pandemic was. Any contradicting narrative that would be introduced, their strategy was to drown it out with so much media overkill that anyone who contradicted the mainstream media viewpoint would simply be drowned out. They decided that that was the best option rather than censorship. But censorship was still invoked a lot. A lot of people that made posts or had videos on YouTube had them taken down because they were deemed to be disinformation.
Sorry, Tim, can I
Yeah.
jump in there as well? I'm only jumping in at spots what's irrelevant. So since them days, we've been jailing people for sharing a Twitter post. So one example is a pensioner got about 9 months in jail just for sharing the post. Another MP, or might be the wife of an MP, she got the most severe punishment, 3 years in jail for commenting on the riots in the UK during that particular time recently. And then there's a good friend, and it's a movement. It's called Tommy Robinson. His name's Stephen actually Lennon, but the movement is called Tommy Robinson. And we are all Tommy Robinsons. We're just here to try and get free speech, get on with our life, and stop being controlled by the media. So yeah, it really started a lot of that, and I'm hoping that people will win.
Well, that'd be nice. The Five Eyes nations, which includes the UK, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, those Five Eyes nations seem to be under attack. The rule of law, the civil society that we've spent hundreds of years building seems to be particularly under attack in the Five Eyes nations. Now, I remember this the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, claiming they were going to poke our eyes out, referring specifically to the Five Eyes. They were going to poke the eyes out of the Five Eyes nations. Well, I'm not suggesting that the Chinese government is behind this, but I think they are colluding with the Luciferians in world government that are behind this whole orchestration. And they are indeed trying to poke the eyes out of the Five Eyes nations. You can see what's happening in those Five Eyes countries, and we have steadily seen a decline in our freedoms and that most specifically our freedom to assemble, our freedom to gather publicly and protest. Ostensibly, they claim, because of the threat of contagion and the fact that a mass demonstration might spread the virus. I mean, obviously, that's just a pretext to prevent us from gathering. One of the rights we're supposed to have in a democracy, the right to gather, the right to assemble. No, we don't have that right anymore. And the right to free speech, where? Tell me where. I haven't seen it. There is no right to free speech anymore. So, the First Amendment in the United States, well, gone. The right to free speech. And where do you see it in Canada or the UK? No, with the pandemic, they found the pretext to deny free speech on the grounds that they were trying to prevent the dissemination of disinformation, when in fact their information is the disinformation, and the people that are trying to tell the truth are being censored as disinformers. Andy, are you there? Andy,
Yeah,
are
I'm
you
still
there?
there. I'm just promoting.
Oh, okay. I just thought something might have happened because I couldn't see you. Okay.
Yes, the disinformation, definitely.
So our leaders are not chosen for their intelligence or achievement, but rather because they are able to win the people's trust and then willing to betray it. And so that's why we often see them making a lot of pre-election promises which they fail to keep once they're elected. In fact, they very often do exactly the opposite of what they were claiming they would do to fix the system before they were elected. And so they're chosen by a small satanic cult, Kabbalistic bankers and Freemasons, that controls the world's finances and media. Our leaders are junior members of this international cult called the Order of the Illuminati. We replace the ruler by a caricature
Definitely.
of a government is their master plan chortle, by a president taken from the mob, from the midst of our puppet creatures. Many leaders are kept in line by having them indulge in horrifying occult rituals, which we have come to know as SRA. And Andy, you've done a lot of work to expose these rings of SRA, the system, and before they were elected. You've even had me write a book, and so they're about chosen by a small satanic cult.
Yeah, there's a good guy, he's still in jail now for a long time, called William Wong. He used to come on the radio show very often. He was a Chinese person, but he was 90%, I'd say, British and 10% Chinese. But he believed in the satanic ritual abuse was really happening, and so did most people in the world. He made a mistake, I think, and that's what you would call it. He went with somebody else to do a sting operation, and yeah, it backfired on him. He didn't sort of rescue the girl he wanted to rescue, and he's ended up in jail for a very long time, which again is Lucifer working against what's right.
Yes.
And
Poor man.
also, I mean, you mentioned about the governments and the elections. Yeah, they definitely do promise everything, and when they're in power, they give nothing. And our first ever time is now when we really don't ever. I don't think most people in Britain now will ever trust politicians again. There's been a lot of disappointments over 10, 20, 30 years, but this year alone and last year, when the Labour government came in, and they're supposed to be for work, for people, for disabled, they've totally gone against. And I believe Keir Starmer has something to do with Satanism. He has to be. He's the most rotten, evil prime minister we've ever had.
Is that right? Oh dear.
Very sad.
Yeah. Well, it is indeed sad to see the decline that has taken place in your society. I mean, I lived there for 5 years, and I was probably there at the beginning of the decline in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And wow, look how far the country has dropped in terms of quality of life and freedoms and economic well being and so forth since that um, decade. It's just been tumultuous. So many leaders are kept in line by having them indulge in horrifying occult rituals, including human sacrifice, sexual orgies, pedophilia, rape, torture, and murder. Yeah, I know it's hard for a lot of people to believe, especially people from that peer group who happen to be respectable. They think, what? The people I know are perfectly respectable. I can't believe that anyone in my peer group would ever indulge in any of this nefarious nonsense. Whoever's making this claim must be a crazy conspiracy theorist. Well, we have the documentation showing it to be the case, which is why we decided to publish 21st Century Lebensborn Children Screaming to Be Heard. Now, the woman that spearheaded that project was Maggie Tuttle, who supplied me with a lot of the documentation because she'd been researching that for much of her career. And Andy was her colleague, and so they both encouraged me to compile the information and put it out in book form, which I did. Now, I don't think it's one of my best books, but it's been getting good reviews. I noticed that it was receiving good reviews online because it was offered for sale. I don't know if it still is. It may have gone out of print, but it was getting really good reviews on Amazon. Anyway, the Illuminati goal is to degrade and enslave humanity mentally and spiritually, if not physically. and economically. This group's influence is like a cancer that extends throughout society. It has subverted many seemingly benevolent organizations, like charities and professional associations, and most political movements, not least Zionism, communism, socialism, liberalism, neoconservatism, and fascism. That is why society seems to be run by inhuman despots who spout platitudes while committing the most pernicious acts of evil. The Illuminati have subverted all religions and institutions, including one group claiming to be the chosen people, ostensibly chosen by their biblical God. In fact, leaders of this group figure prominently in creating this satanic dispensation. But whenever critics suggest that the chosen are being misled and betrayed, the critics are accused of racism, a clever ploy aimed at quashing any and all resistance, not by the entire group, of course, but by the corrupt leaders that have led the whole tribe astray. And the Talmud, being a so called sacred text of these people, is one of the problems that has led the population astray, because the Talmud, if you've ever read it, is horrifying. I don't think there is a more horrifying book of influence in existence. It's just horrifying. Have you read it, Andy?
No, sorry, I haven't. I was just sending a little message to Amazon. Why can't we buy this book? I'd love to buy a dozen copies of it. I know you're talking about something totally different. Um, yeah, it's on screen now. The 21st Century Lebanon's
See, look how
Children
many.
Screaming to Be Heard.
It's got 5-star reviews,
It says
and
unavailable.
yeah, I mean, why is it unavailable? It could be made available as an ebook, a Kindle book for free.
Yeah, we can look into doing that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that book is information rich, which would arm people and supply them with the ammunition they need to go after these corrupt Luciferian and satanic cabals. What
Yeah,
is the.
obviously,
Yeah.
the main reason for Maggie's involvement of this, yes, there was child abuse, there was satanic abuse, but it was the government stealing your children via social workers, and our children was a fine example of, they made up stories, and the children went into care because of the judges were scared, and or Satanism, whichever. Um, that's what that situation was really about. The government taking control of your own kids. And sadly,
Uh-huh.
25 years of age and 26 years of age, our children are still in the adult care system. Yeah. So that's been since the age of 8, that's 18 years. You times that by whatever it costs to live in a home or in your own home, and but the state paying for it. It's what Maggie Tuttle calls $1 million or pound industry.
Yeah. Well, Andy, the other video of Chuck Swindoll Jr.'s that I found to be very informative and educational was Lucifer and Luciferians, where he went into an in-depth explanation of where these groups came from and where they are found and what they do. And it's horrifying. So, as I understand it, as he explained it, the Luciferians are a higher caste in this evil cabal, and they're the aristocratic and king lines. They're the monarchs, they're the aristocrats of our various, well, I guess you could say Western European countries. But I would argue that they have infested themselves in other cultures around the world. Like, for example, the Li family, spelled Li in English, is a Chinese Illuminati Luciferian family. There are supposed to be 13 of these Illuminati Luciferian families. For example, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Kennedys. The Kennedy family is said to be one of them. And yeah, Fritz Springmeier did a wonderful research book, which is actually available free online, called Bloodlines of the Illuminati. I have chewed, swallowed, and digested that book, and it's very fascinating, horrifying, but fascinating, and I recommend it very highly. Yeah, this is the video by Chuck Swindoll, Lucifer and Luciferians, Masters of Deception. And he talks about how in the beginning the Amalekites, which means the blood drinkers, one of the neighbors of the Israelites, were engaged in the worship of malevolent deities. You would maybe recognize some of the names: Baal from the Old Testament, Baal, Moloch. These are names of the so-called gods that they venerated and worshipped. Baal has been exposed as a disguised form of Lucifer worship, and the Amalekites later migrated, and later a culture emerged in the where present day Ukraine is found, and that general region, there was a country called Khazaria. And the Khazarians were devil worshippers. They worshipped Baal, and they performed horrific child sacrifices and ritual killings, SRA, satanic ritual, and they eventually were encouraged by their king to convert from this Baal worship religion to Judaism, to disguise their worship of the dark forces and of Lucifer and so on, to disguise the real religion that they followed. They began masquerading under the guise of another religion. And eventually they became a sect within Judaism, which was the Ashkenazi sect. And so they had a caste society with different racial groups making up their nation. Some of the population was Eurasian, and some more on the Aryan side. The higher caste were the Aryan groups. They were Caucasian in appearance, and they migrated to Germany, where they had many duchy, many cottages, and they settled there and became the Ashkenazi Jews. So the Khazarians are well identified by people like Chuck Swindoll Jr. as being a mafia, the Khazarian mafia. And so you can read some material about the Khazarian mafia. Some researchers refer to this evil cabal by that designation. They have infiltrated the aristocratic bloodlines, and they perform these rituals, satanic rituals, in various mansions owned by the aristocracy, and some of which are owned by families that were not aristocratic but have managed through their influence, financial mainly influence, to enter the aristocracy of Europe. I would like to point to the Rothschilds as being one of these Khazarian mafia families who have become prominent, and even you hear the term Lord Rothschild when they shouldn't be considered lords, because they're not of the aristocratic bloodline of Europe. But as of early 20th century, they did gain breeding rights in the British royal family because they bailed the British royal family out of debt. And so the deal was made. In exchange for us bailing you out of debt, we now have breeding rights. So I would say that because of that, the British royals that we now see, the so-called Windsor family, which is actually the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha family, we could argue is in large part now a Rothschild family. What percentage of their, bloodline has been usurped? Perhaps as much as 80%, but let's just say that they are not what they purport to be. They are genetically a Rothschild family. So that means they are not a legitimate ruling family, but a kind of usurpation has taken place. Now, with these aristocratic bloodline families, they perform SRA, satanic ritual abuse, and many times they are said, at least by Charles Swindoll Jr.'s research, which I found to be quite extensive and quite impressive, they torture these poor children for hours, which releases adrenaline into the blood, and having the child in this situation for hours upon end, a chemical known as adrenochrome builds up in the blood. And these are probably where the vampire myths originate, because just before the child is killed, they drink the blood of the child from the carotid artery in the neck. They bite the neck and drink in order to harvest the adrenochrome. And the image that you have in your mind of such a thing is just what we see in the vampire films, right? Blood drinking, biting the neck, and so on. Yeah, I mean, it's horrific. It's hard to imagine that some of this could even be real, but that is what this ritual consists of and why it is done. When they have ingested this adrenochrome, they become their libido becomes very, very strong, and they engage in Luciferian or satanic ritual orgies. And they also benefit from greater vitality and longevity and are able to extend their life expectancy significantly. So there again, you see the origin of the immortal vampire myth, that these vampires drink blood, and once they become vampires, they become immortal. And the only way to kill them, according to the various novels and films that have been made about vampires, is through a ritual involving confining them to a coffin and driving a stake in their hearts and so forth. But suffice to say that the origin of the immortal vampire myth comes from this practice of harvesting the adrenochrome from their SRA victims and drinking their blood. And this facilitates greater vitality, increased longevity, and they actually extend their life expectancy. So very often we find that these Luciferians live to great ages of reaching their 90s or even living over 100 years.
So I recently does that mean if we drink each other's blood, we live longer?
Well, you see, the point though is that they're actually benefiting from the chemical in the blood that is released when these children are sadly tortured for hours, and those that are in charge of the ritual, the priest or the priestess that's in charge of the ritual, become very skilled at keeping the victim alive for extended periods of time, so that it's horrifying to imagine, Andy. Imagine a poor child victim of these cults being tortured for hours and not succumbing because this person that is in charge of the ritual is very skilled at keeping them alive for extended periods, even under these extreme torture conditions. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying, and it's hard for people to even contemplate. But we need to face the reality of this so that we can bring an end to it. Like, I have to say that Mel Gibson, in making the film Sound of Freedom, has done a great service to humanity for exposing these child trafficking rings that are connected and involved in this type of nefarious activity. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I was going to say, talking about ritual abuse,
yes.
although the mainstream media definitely says, the narrative is it was a moral pandemic. That's what Wikipedia says. The satanic panic is a moral panic. Well, no, it wasn't, because
A what panic?
a moral panic.
Okay.
Yeah, so moral, Morale. But the reason in the last 5, 10 years I've noticed people believe it more, but they keep quiet, is websites for um, women's sexual abuse and men's sexual abuse. They actually recognise ritual abuse as a proper thing that happens to people. They keep quiet, I guess, because they don't want to talk about it too much. But on their websites, it's all over there, and I do believe, it is real. It's just try to prove it's real, like William Wong did, and over the years, um, he's been labelled the the main man for the problem over here. But a lot of the police people on their websites are saying, and I don't think this is right, but I don't know because I'm a bit daft sometimes.
Mhm.
But if child abuse is linked to faith or belief, then it's more than likely to be SRA. But I'm not totally sure on that one. But so they are talking about it, but when it comes to mainstream, definitely not. No, it's ridiculous.
Well, we wrote a book. I published a book that I wrote about Ruby Akhtar, who was at the time of her abduction to Northern Ireland. She was a child being raised by a family in Pakistan, and I believe they were a Jewish family. They followed Judaism; that was their religion, and sadly, this visitor from Northern Ireland abducted her and took her back to his homeland. And she claims that she was subjected to SRA at various venues in Northern Ireland. Yeah, there it is. Goodbye, Ruby Akhtar. And once again, a
But
5-star review.
and you'll be very happy to know it's still available on paperback.
Excellent. That's wonderful. I don't collect any royalties from this book. I wrote it for the cause. I wrote it for Ruby, and I asked that all proceeds from the sale of the book go to her because she actually had a mission to build safe houses for victims of abuse female victims of abuse. Not just SRA, not just satanic ritual abuse, but any type of abuse. The women would be able to go to these shelters that Ruby planned to build. I think she was planning to to undertake this internationally. Have you heard at all, Andy, about any progress report from Ruby Akhtar?
Nothing. No, she just disappeared from messages and emails. She'd kind of doing her own thing.
Okay. Well, at any rate, she will be probably pleased to know that her book is still available for sale and has a 5-star review, so it must be selling. And I know that Amazon Kindle offers free giveaway books. They're available free, so that's probably the case with this book as well.
Well, just a little joking aside, they
Yeah.
probably give all the books away for free that they can't sell. Oh dear.
Well, I mean, Kindle is a different proposition, right? The Kindle books are often free. Amazon offers that as some kind of promotion for the company to offer Kindle books free online.
Sure.
Yeah, anyway, Ruby, managed to escape from her kidnapper, and after having endured many SRA type rituals, she managed to escape, and she got some help from the local police in Northern Ireland, and her case was her testimony was recorded, and it was the transcripts of her testimony that I used in writing this novel. Of course, I wasn't there, and I didn't experience what she experienced, so some of the novel is fiction because it's based on my imagined scenario of what she must have experienced with this SRA horror. Anyway, we do our best. We try to help, and some people appreciate what we do, and some people appear ungrateful. So, what can I say? I did my best for Ruby.
Yeah, and there's a few more names of your books on screen. The Peace Train and uh, Ruby Akhtar, Sailing the Seven Seas, and so on. 21st Century, Lebensborn.
Yeah, well, I'm making another effort to publish some books that I previously have not published, and or did so early in my career, and they weren't promoted properly, so they're being republished. So hopefully, this time I'll have some success in terms of sales and perhaps even recognition. It's sad that quality writers and quality musicians are often just not managing to succeed because of the changes that have taken place in the entertainment field, due to new entities like Amazon emerging, which have done damage to the traditional publishing industry.
Yeah, like you said, it's not just books, is it? It's actors, it's musicians, the whole entertainment is it's as if the greedy people want to control not only what you think and say, but how you express yourself now, within books and music. They want to try and control everything about you.
Well, yeah, I mean, Amazon is so saturated with books, and then they're constantly encouraging through their different promotional campaigns for complete novices to write a book and publish it with Amazon. In other words, people that, have not, they're not professional writers by any stretch of the imagination. They're being encouraged to put together a book, maybe even using Chat GTP to write the book for them and claiming that they wrote the book. And then they're publishing it. It's not quality literature, but there's so many of these books now available on Amazon that there's no quality control, and the reader doesn't know which book holds quality and which book is just dross. They don't know. They can't tell. They're not writers themselves. They're not artists. They may not even be connoisseurs of literature, so they can't tell which book is a quality book and which book is not of value. They can't distinguish. They can't tell one from the other. And so what's happened is that quality literature gets buried, swamped because of the glut of books on the market.
Maybe it's time to go back to the bookshop. At least they can't stack everything there. You just have a look at a few and then just take it and read it. How simple.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, it's been a great hour, Tim, and again, yeah, I've really enjoyed the interaction, and